based on a movie that everybody hates, but I kind of like, is a game that nobody remembers, and surprise, surprise, I kind of like this too. Yay! I mean, it's a superhero game, I'd be surprised if I didn't like it. Now, I was initially concerned because I didn't even know that this game existed. Because of the internet, almost every single work of art on this planet has a fan base, no matter how weird or obscure. But I have literally never seen anything about this game until I stumbled upon it on Amazon of all places. And of course, I had to buy it without learning jack shit about it. Ironically, I got my copy for only $4. But there's a catch. If you read the title, then you know I'm going to be talking about the GameCube release. Because I received this in the mail the exact same weekend that I came across a super cheap 360 and bought that as well, which can play the original Xbox release. I get it, this is like galaxy brain first world problems, and even then it's really inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. But when you're a content creator, obtaining the best quality possible is a personal necessity that nags almost every single one of us. And as much as I love the GameCube, this is not the best way to play Fantastic Four, or really any multi-platform game. Not just because the GameCube's trigger button things that have a ton of travel, or that super clicky uncomfortable Z button, but because of these fucking micro DVDs. Hello, welcome to Did You Know Gaming. Did you know that the GameCube is graphically better than the PS2? But because Nintendo wanted to prevent piracy, while also making more money by forcing developers to abide by their proprietary micro DVDs, you can't tell. These little fucking mistakes could only hold 1.3 gigabytes when even a DVD could hold almost 5. It's the N64 all over again. Okay. When playing the game on its own on a TV, it's not something that you'll worry about or really even notice. However, when directly comparing side by side to the Xbox, it looks like shit. And to make matters even worse, all of the extra stuff that makes superhero games cool, like readable comics, interviews, trailers for upcoming games, they're all super compressed. I mean like Game Boy Advance level of compression here. Even the pre-rendered cutscenes have been ruined. What the fuck, man? Anyways, let's talk about the actual game before I give myself a heart attack. So a big concern with a lot of tie-in games is how will developers take a story that barely fits feature length and extend it even further to be a full $60 game, especially since this game took the boring origin story approach that has a lot of sitting and waiting and cream pies. Sorry, wrong Fantastic Four. Funnily enough, as in the word funny, not funnel, this game actually had a very similar issue that the beloved Spider-Man 2 had, that being that the script was constantly changing, forcing the game's writers to go to the film set and keep asking questions about what's been altered in order to keep the game's narrative up to date. Now, I'm not so sure about Fantastic Four. Honestly, I don't think anybody who worked on this even wants their name brought up in the same sentence as the title. But Spider-Man 2 devs have told stories about having to go all the way to the film set so they can do their job, only to be given a page or two of the script at a time, just so they didn't leak it. Oh, piss off. Do you know how hard it is to work on an adaptation when you barely even know the source material? Luckily, the writers for FF had already worked in the Ultimate comics, meaning that regardless of script changes, this game was in relatively good hands. I said relatively good. I know that Ultimatum was written by Jeff Loeb, but the joke is funny, so I'm keeping it in. So instead of being stuck in Reed's lab for the entire runtime like in the film, the team travels from country to country, in search of materials that will make the cosmic reversion work like in the movie. It's an all-around pretty good compromise. Makes the game more interesting to play. It allows us to fight lots of other supervillains from the comics, while also not being too different so the final act from the movie still makes sense. Now we get to fight characters like Mole Man, I've heard of him in passing, Puppet Master, Diablo, wasn't he in Suicide Squad? Annihilus, he's cool apparently, and Dragon Man. Look, no offense if you like these characters in the comics, and I have no clue if they're accurate to the books, but damn! Despite getting 3 missions each, none of them are remotely interesting. I understand that it's a tie-in game, but man, where's Doom when you need him? Ironically, he's actually the most interesting and enjoyable to watch, both in the movie and in the game. Maybe they should have actually leaned into his character and given him more screen time, unlike the movie. Sadly, Doom only has 3 boss battles, which may sound like a lot, but when you add up all these fights as well as cutscenes, he's only in the game for about 10 minutes. He's in this less than he's in the movie. So the villains are pretty garbage. But the best addition to this game's story, hands down, is none other than Nick fucking Fury. Yeah! Sometimes I think about not saying this shit out loud, and it doesn't sound that bad. And then I say it, it's like, wow, this is what I do with my free time. Now, if you don't really care about movie rights, legal deals, and copyright shenanigans, then this may seem a bit dumb to get excited about, so I'll explain it really quickly. Ultimate Nick Fury, who by the way was based on Samuel L. Jackson, is in a Fox Fantastic Four title only 3 years before his film debut, where he was played by Samuel L. Jackson in a Marvel-made film. Stuff like that makes me appreciate these games. When it came to these tie-ins, there was far less isolation with all of Marvel's works than the movies, which were basically all separated by thousands of miles due to movie rights sales in the 90s. In the grand scheme of things, it's really not important, but it does make me appreciate how much care some of these designers and writers have for these characters, even if the villains are really boring. At first glance, this game looks like it'd be another X-Men Legends style game, complete with a very similar UI, RPG mechanics, and an isometric camera. However, it's actually a third-person beat-em-up, a genre that was really common back in the 2000s, but isn't all that much anymore, at least in superhero games. And yeah, this does kind of make the game feel like it's 16 years old, because it is. But as I've established on this channel time and time again, I'm okay with the game feeling dated, it's all about how it plays. And for the most part, it plays pretty well. While each different character has their own unique powers, the entire game still has to feel balanced. If each different team member felt too different in terms of power level, then the entire game may feel like you're driving down a bumpy road at 100 miles per hour, with whole chunks of the game just playing like utter trash. So, in Fantastic Four, the entire cast plays the same while also specializing in different kinds of attacks that align with their powers. This even extends to these little interactable QuickTime events. Some are fine, like Ben's and Sue's, where you just mash A and rotate the left stick respectively, but Johnny and Reed's suck. Reed's is just a quick puzzle that's too easy to be difficult but too complicated to speed through. It literally feels like the exact same thing from the beginning of the game up until the end. And Johnny's just feels weird. You have to hold A with perfect timing until the meter is full. Throughout my entire 7-hour playthrough, I always felt like I was doing it wrong. Do you hear that? This dog has been barking for like 30 minutes and now they're riling up our dogs. What the fuck is going on? My biggest concern with this game was level gimmicks, like Johnny having a flying mission, almost like a shitty Panzer Dragoon, or Sue having an invisible stealth mission where she can't be spotted or you immediately lose. Thankfully, there aren't really any gimmicks like that whatsoever. Johnny barely has any levels to begin with, and Sue's missions have optional stealth. Yay! Forced stealth missions are probably the worst mechanic in video game history, right next to microtransactions, so I'm very glad that there isn't any of that. But to make up for it, there's multiple escort missions. There's supers, which are basically just these little emblems that enact a devil trigger, but for some reason it was really difficult to find any of them. The boss fights are pretty straightforward, most of them are just bash their face in, but there were a few fights with very specific strategies, like destroy whatever keeps healing them, but none of them were ever really too complicated. I only had to look up what to do a handful of times. While I appreciate that this game wants me to use my noggin, I do not have patience for trial and error in a movie tie-in game. For some reason, there's a live system as well, but it feels very half-baked. At the beginning of each level, you have 2 lives, and those lives are shared amongst the AI-controlled team members. Can you collect more? Apparently you can, according to this walkthrough I found online, but surprise surprise, I could never find any. Does the automatic amount of only 2 lives change whenever there's more than 2 members? No! And worst of all, if you lose both lives and anybody, including the AI team members, dies, you have to start the entire level over again. Thankfully, all of these missions are pretty short. Also, I played this game on easy, so this wasn't really a huge problem for me. But even dying in the Fantastic Four movie game once, damn it, is one time too many. Since they're all pretty short, if you hate a mission, it'll usually end in a few minutes. Unlike other superhero games, which feel like they can just drag on and on, I actually liked a significant amount of this game's levels. My second favorite mission actually has no powers whatsoever for most of it. It's when Doom changes Ben back to normal, but Ben decides to ignore his evil fiancée, who's not even in this game by the way. Good riddance. And save his friends. You can attack the Doom bots, but there's no use since you barely do any damage, but you can improvise and use stuff all over the lab to instantly kill them. This section doesn't last very long at all, but I really appreciated it. But my all-time favorite missions in this game were the ones that took place in the city. In lots of other superhero games, there's a heavy emphasis on rooftops and scaling skyscrapers, so I love to see ground level heroes, especially in levels with this much detail. Since the game doesn't have to load an entire world, it has more freedom to add as much as the console can handle at once, and it still looks fantastic. The worst levels in the game are the ones that take place in metal corridors, which are an uncomfortable amount of them. All of these dimly lit corridors have no memorable design choices or landmarks whatsoever, making it hard to know where you're going and causes whole sections of this game to feel like a blur. There's a portion of missions that take place in a SHIELD prison, and it looks exactly like every other Inside mission in the game. Fun fact, this movie came out when I was 5 years old, and when it came out on DVD, I believe that my uncle and my aunt bought it for my cousin, and the two of us would watch it together. Now, something that you need to know is that as a child, I used to make up names for superheroes that I liked, and I'd force people to call them that in my presence. Case in point, Spider-Man, for some reason, was Bushy Man. I have no clue why he was called Bushy Man exactly. Maybe he was in a bush in an episode of the '94 animated series. But that's what I called him. I obviously grew out of this and have forgotten about it entirely. The only reason I remember all this is because of two things. One, my mom tells these stories about it at family get-togethers back when those were a thing. And two, I, for some reason, have a vivid memory of me and my cousin, who's only a year older than me, watching the Fantastic Four movie on TV while yelling at each other about Ben Grimm's superhero name. My cousin's been a lifelong comic book fan, even as a 6-year-old, so of course he knew that his name was the thing. He also paid attention to the movie more than I did, but I didn't care. For some reason, I was dead set on his name being, wait for this, The Rock. Best part, didn't even know that Dwayne Johnson even existed at this point. We're talking about 2005. I hate wrestling. Anyways, I think I've rambled on long enough. Is Fantastic Four all that bad? Not really. I actually enjoyed a fair amount of it. You know, when I wasn't dying or getting lost. If you've enjoyed other superhero movie tie-in games, then you'll probably like this one. It's a decent beat 'em up that can be finished in one weekend. Just get it on the Xbox if you want that quality. Now, is the sequel game just as good? I have no clue, and I don't plan on finding out for a long time. Okay, that's all I got for you guys. Like, subscribe, and all that jazz. I'll catch you guys next time. Later, kids. Have a good night.
Hottest game. Game Informer raves. Fantastic Four has awesome powers. Insane co-op gameplay. And GamePro calls it the ultimate adventure.